I'm gonna move, I'm gonna go, I'm gonna tell everyone I know. I'm looking for a home in the heart of the country.
Exposing the con and conservative Thom Hartmann here with you. Arlen Specter, Senator, United States Senator from Pennsylvania.
Our economic problems are enormously serious, more serious than is publicly disclosed. And I think we're on the brink of a depression.
I think we're on the brink of a depression. United States Senator Arlen Specter, the Republican from Pennsylvania, up for re-election in a year and a half, maybe soon to be a Democrat, who knows, but in any case, yes. So how did we get there? Well, here's how we got there. And yes, this you can dump a whole bunch of Democrats in with the Republicans on this, but this is by and large a Republican gig. Or let's rephrase that. It's by and large a conservative gig. In fact, here's an example of how and why. This is William Seidman, the guy who started the Resolution Trust Corporation back when the S&Ls melted down. This is 30 years ago when or 20 years ago when the S&Ls melted down, and they were nationalized for a while. And Bill Seidman was the guy who did it. Good Republican. This is a speech he gave just a few months ago in Grand Rapids where he talks about, A, how it happened, how the ideology drove this thing, and then I'm going to get back to the lobbying piece of this, and then B, what happened at AIG. And I find, frankly, the AIG part just as interesting as the rest of it. Here he
It was proposed that their regulation, or at least disclosure, be required.
Now, he's talking about these tranched, collateralized debt obligations that he had invented.
And the industry fought it, and the Federal Reserve, under Alan Greenspan, vehemently opposed. And they made the argument, which you hear all the time, and I can remember Alan saying, look, these are sophisticated contracts between knowledgeable buyers and knowledgeable sellers. No regulator can do as well as they'll do. So what do you need a regulator for?
Libertarian 101.
The market will regulate these. And he won the day.
Unfortunately.
So among the list of our friends, along with me and others, Alan was clearly, I'd say, the key person responsible for the fact that we didn't even know how many of those contracts there were.
Now, Alan Greenspan, but this guy still calls himself a Republican, and he's a good friend of Alan Greenspan's, and he prefaced all his comments by saying that. Then he continues in this same sentence, the same soundbite, to talk about what happened with AIG.
And they were up in the trillions. So when AIG got in trouble, it turned out that they had one division with 400 people in it. They had 80,000 employees. They had 400 people in one division. They wrote all these contracts. They didn't report any of them. So they were, you'd say, gambling by writing these contracts. And when things started to go bad and they had to pay on these contracts, the whole monster, the largest insurance company in the world, went under.
Now, what made that possible? What made it possible was the Commodity Futures Modernization Act, in part. This was in 2002, or excuse me, in 2000. Again, Bill Clinton signed this, pushed through by the Republicans, in particular Phil Gramm. That act actually prohibits the CFTC from regulating financial derivatives. Now, you just heard Bill Seidman talk about how back 20 years ago when he first invented these financial derivatives in order to sell off the assets of the savings and loans, and he did it in a totally transparent fashion, he went to Greenspan and he said, shouldn't we be regulating these things? Shouldn't we at least be laying out who's writing these contracts, where they are? Greenspan said, no, this is a great example of the free market. Yes, and it was actually a great example of how the free market will destroy everything. How a truly free market is like saying, let's let a cell grow as fast and as long as it wants. In a biological system, that is called cancer. Free markets the free market. That phrase, free market, is another way of saying cancer. It's like saying a free cell. A free cell in your body. It can do anything it wants. It can grow as fast as it wants to grow. That's cancer. Normally, things are homeostatic. In football, you say, okay, we've got a football player here. We're going to call him a free player. He's got no rules. He can kick people in the crotch. He can give them a head chop. He can knock, no rules. Laissez-faire. Hands off from the regulators. Well, this was passed in law. Basel II weakened the capital reserve banks for requirements for banks. There was no predatory lending enforcement. I have shared with you before the article that Elliot Spitzer wrote a year ago February, for the Washington Post, in which he said that the federal government, the Bush administration, when he and 49 other attorneys general of other states tried to prosecute banks, or at least investigate banks, for selling these dicey collateralized debt obligations, that the Bush administration invoked a Civil War era law to block them. So they couldn't even look into what was being done by the banks. I'm telling you, this isn't, in part it was the triumph or the disaster of ideology like Greenspan, but perhaps in larger part it was the opportunity of the predators, the thieves, to just take us to the cleaners and rob us blind.
You're listening